my first question was, how have you helped leaders to delve into the deeper level of cultures?
Is this mic working? Oh, it's not working. Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I think the one word that came to me was deep and careful listening. I think if you ask me what have I learned as a leader in the past 30 years, is that word listening. I am still learning to listen, but also listen to not just people who agree with you, listen to people who may not agree with you, actually careful listening, as well as those who are not, well, people from the margins particularly also, not just those who are close to you, but people from the margins, different ages, as well as now I learn to also listen to those who are much younger than me as well, meaning teenagers. There are sometimes difficult questions I ask a teenager, 18-year-old, 70-year-old, what do you think? As well, I find that I learn a lot from teenagers as well, even though they may not grasp the whole picture. So I think different ages, I find it really, really helpful, the listening, and also willing particularly to listen to people who disagree with you. I think that is one thing I've learned in terms of intercultural leadership.
So, do you want to respond to the other questions that our professor asked?
Well, I am interested in knowing more about how you develop leaders, especially you transit your role. Okay.
OMF has done quite a bit of research on this subject, on developing leaders, and we realized that we use a model called a triangle model. We realize that how is a leader developed is the three aspects of a triangle. The first aspect is formal training. Of course, there's leadership training courses, whatever. But that actually, the significance of that is only about 15-20% maximum. So formal training plays a role, but a very small role in developing a leader. The second one is one-to-one personal mentoring. Maybe another 20%, 25%. But the other 50%, interestingly, was a surprise to us when they did that research, was expose them to challenging tasks for them to grow in a task. And I thought of an example, and that is in Exodus 17. You remember, Joshua was much younger then. They just came out from Egypt. I don't think Joshua has a lot of experience in fighting against the Amalekites, but Moses sent Joshua to fight against the Amalekites as a young leader, but he was, of course, on the mountain praying. But yet, I think Joshua's beginning of the training didn't start with formal training, but that direct facing a difficult task. I thought that was the beginning. But of course, after that, you follow the examples that then Moses went up to the mountains with Joshua as well. You see the mentoring, the one-to-one as well, of course. So I think that two parts very, very important, the one-to-one training as well as give them particularly challenging tasks. Particularly, I think some research has shown that in the current generation as well, people hate just theoretical talk. They need to be exposed, hands-on. They need to get their hands dirty to grow in a job. Not to say theory is important, but interestingly, this is the research within the OMF, and that is that we find that the formal training is only a small part. Not that it's unimportant, but it's only a small part of the whole leadership development. So that's to respond to your question.
So he also has a third question regarding the
I have a follow-up question.
Okay.
So,
please do.
So, could I say that what you just mentioned falls into the category of formal education, non-formal education, and informal education?
Yeah, that is your expertise. Yeah.
Oh.
No, I agree.
Yeah, so Erin also has a third question regarding a very sensitive topic, whether a seminary is an optimum environment for cultivating intercultural mission leaders. Yeah. I guess this question is really interesting, and
when I
other
asked,
panel can also join.
I thought that question was for Dr. Wong. Was it true? I thought so. Am I right?
I guess it's an interesting phenomenon, especially in Hong Kong, because our majority students are Hong Kong people or from mainland. We seldom has a foreigner, as we quote-unquote, in CGST at least, but we don't know about other situations or other seminaries in the world. What are you guys doing, actually? Maybe you can share your experience about multicultural learning in theological studies.
I'm sure others.
If we stay with the language of, let's say, multicultural, my colleagues, teaching colleagues, must teach a student body which is somewhere between 45 to 50% non-Caucasian, non-Western, if you want to use those kind of categories. And so with our teaching colleagues, we're working with a younger female Vietnamese member of faculty. I have a Nigerian colleague who helps me in the area of research and missiology. We have Chinese teaching colleagues who are both Mandarin and Cantonese speaking. And we have a range of adjunct colleagues as well. And this is important for us because increasingly as students are coming to us from countries like Myanmar, they're wrestling with questions sometimes for which those of us who don't understand that context sometimes don't have any answers. We may not necessarily have the apparatus to engage with their questions even before we begin to think about what we might offer by way of answer or response. And so the sense that together as a teaching body, we must try in some way reflect the increasingly global realities of what life is like in a city like Melbourne, or indeed in Sydney or other cities in Australia. This is part of what we have to be and how we have to operate and how we have to work with the range of questions that we're posed.
Well, maybe something small. Only during COVID, so we opened Zoom, like for teaching courses, and then we get a lot of, not a lot, but we get several pastors from the Arab world joining our courses via Zoom. And these normally are not able to come to Israel to study because they live in the Arab world. I think we also as a seminary learned a lot how to interact with students from different cultures. And I think probably it opens door for serving in different countries, in other countries, using technology. So maybe it's a new thing for us, but maybe probably in your context it's more obvious.
Yeah, so I think this question is seminary is the best place to learn about diversity or deep levels of culture. Fuller Seminary has an incredibly diverse student body, because largely we teach online as well, and we have students all over. So that is helpful. And you hear a but coming, right? But deep levels, right? Not the superficial levels. The deep levels, the problem of so that's really helpful. And it's really, so in that sense, that's going to be instrumental. The issue is, a lot of people don't know themselves that well. So when they say, oh, let me tell you about African culture, it's all stereotypes. Like their level of their self-understanding is very shallow. So they're trying to learn other people, but when they are not very good cultural informants of themselves. You know what I'm saying? They'll say, oh, you know how Korean people are? They're terrible. So it's all stereotypes. So in that sense, that's not going to help you. It won't even help you when you met 10 Korean students, like they're not helping you because maybe you out of them, one of them actually has a real education. And they actually can tell you, they can break the whole thing down and saying, historically, this is why, yes, it's a stereotype, but it's a generational difference. Like all the generations are not like that. Oh, you know, because the Koreans are like this or whatever, this region's like this, they'll break the whole thing down. If they don't do that, more interaction with different people enforces your stereotype. And this is basically what we've seen over and over again. Like a lot of the Asian American students, so some of the professors, they're like, oh, I learned all my insights about Asian American students, Asian American Christianity from my students. And I'm like, oh, that's why you're so misinformed. Because Asian American students, they don't know themselves that well. That's my job, right? So it's complicated. It's not that easy, right? I think that's probably one of the, so diversity does help, but it doesn't guarantee the fact that people will all know about each other. And that is quite difficult to do.
Exactly. I'm thinking about I suppose all of us are leaders who work globally. So may I ask whether you encounter any challenge moments or stories that when you work with people or sisters and brothers, brothers and sisters in another culture, which makes you really impressed in good or bad sense, that you want to share with us? And for all of us, please feel free to send message to the WhatsApp or queue up in the center of the hall, prepare for the Q&A section.
While you're thinking, because I didn't want to share this thing. Okay, like this is something I definitely wanted to share. In the U.S., there actually has been serious questions and doubts about multiculturalism in general. Just in churches too. Like even multiracial churches, they're like, this is very deep suspicion. The reason why is because we realize it's actually superficial. And so in this sense, I would say, with Dr. Fung's presentation, I would say, I really appreciate, and it's really important the fact that our culture is biblically guided, but I would say it's going to be biblically guided cultures, because how the language was used was say, oh, I don't have culture, I have biblical culture. You have Asian culture, I have biblical culture. That's what all the white Christians were telling us. And we said, this is racism. This is toxic, but you're hiding behind biblical language. So we said, this is not going to help us be multicultural, right? So I think, I tell my students, I'm like, we want to, so it makes Fuller kind of weird because we're very critically aware. Structurally, historically, power dynamics, we should know all that stuff. But I say, but that's not the end, because theologically and spiritually, this is not the only thing we do. So how do we know that? At the same time, be led by the gospel and spiritually be deep. Because if you don't do it that way, then it's the same thing as critical race theory, which I teach, by the way. I teach them this and saying, this is how you break down what's happening, but this is not going to give us a solution. Like it tells you how messed up the problem is. And theologically, spiritually, how do we become the kind of person we need to be? How do we make sure that we don't hide behind things like, well, this is kingdom culture. No, it's just white culture. You just call it kingdom culture. And you call mine Asian culture. Like this doesn't work, right? So that's basically why trying to figure out how to do this intercultural or multicultural interaction has become very fraught. And I think there are a lot more questions about how do we do it well. Right? Because if you don't, we realize it's literally toxic. It'll hurt you.
Could I, sorry.
Just very quickly, is it working? No. Okay, it's working. Just, sorry, I interrupted. Just very quickly to respond to Dr. Lee's comment, I really appreciate what he said. I think I want to use the example of the shepherd again. The shepherd kind of, Psalm 23, protects the sheep. Protects give me the sense of feeling safe. The sheep needs to feel safe. The leaders of an organization, including CGST, the leaders need to create an environment that people feel safe to be who they are. You don't make them to be somebody else. But that creating the space need to come from the top leadership. And I think I want to reuse the word you used this morning or this afternoon is we need perhaps to enrich our vocabulary. Because by enriching the vocabulary, we create an environment where people can speak differently and free to speak and feel safe to speak. Because sometimes we run out of vocabulary. And I think we kind of stereotype. But I think that is one thing I keep reflecting on what you shared this afternoon on how do we enrich our vocabulary, which I think is very, very important. I just want to respond to that. Thank you.
I was going to just pick up a couple of points that I've been reflecting on as we've been talking. And I think the multicultural, cross-cultural, intercultural conversation is helpful and it leads us to some further, I think, realities. And to pick up Daniel's challenge implicit in the question around representation and diversity in faculty, I think the biggest challenge that our faculty are dealing with and helping our students to deal with is what I might call transculturality, which is actually that I, as a person, and our students as people, as human beings, actually exist and find that they embody different culturalities, that they are living between two cultures and trying to navigate and negotiate that. So it's not as if they're indeed moving into another culture and then having to ask, in that other culture, am I now multicultural or intercultural? But actually, I am transcultural. In this singular body, I am wrestling with these different cultural realities that define me and shape me. And I'm not sure how to negotiate and navigate that. And I think that's the challenge for our teaching faculty, is when they're dealing with a large class of 50 younger leaders from Myanmar who are wrestling with questions about what does it mean to be a part of a church that my parents' generation holds tightly. And I can't understand this culture fully because I'm transcultural, partly dealing with realities here in Australia, partly dealing with the realities of church, which maintains a Chin cultural homeland mentality. I'm transcultural. How do I deal with this? And I think that's, for us, the biggest challenge for the younger church leaders in Australia who are experiencing this in themselves.
Thank you. So I think we got the first question for tonight. Please kindly introduce yourself a bit and try to keep your question short.
Oh, this word. I'm Min from Taiwan, and I'm really appreciate that Dr. Fong mentioned the Culture Center leadership as a conclusion for this speech. But my question is, the concept of selflessness and humanity and faithfulness, actually they will be understood and interpreted quite differently in different cultures. So how can we use it in the practice part when we are in the mission field? And I believe that the interaction between cultures and biblical core value is actually a dynamic dialectic process. So the questions for Dr. Fong and for our panels would be, maybe you can share about in the mission field the story about how you really realize that the core value would be understood so differently in different cultures, and how would you represent it in different culture? And as very theological, how would you observe the dynamic of the dialect process of the culture and biblical core values? Thank you.
Okay, now you can hear me. Just I'll give a brief answer and the others can answer. And that is, I think of the word community. One can only learn through a community. I mean, Jesus has this community with the 12 disciples. There's time in and out, time together, sharing together. So I think the way I learn about what you share about, for example, humility, other aspects can be interpreted differently in different cultures. But I can only learn that not through textbooks, not through lectures, but when I actually interact with somebody from Myanmar, from Africa, from Middle East, and sometimes even disagree together and talk together. And only through that. And that's why the 2 years being the chair of the Lausanne Congress Planning Committee was really, really helpful for me to learn different cultures. And it was a spiritual growth for me to appreciate other cultures. Because people look at it, at one thing very, very differently, from totally different angles. And this is particularly, I think, relevant to CGST, if I may even suggest, is that I'm sure CGST, like other seminaries, have practicums. I wonder whether your practicum will need to include some of the community time with different cultures, meaning from Latin America, Africa. You have to create a practicum that you're exposed to different cultures, maybe 3 months, 4 months. You live among these people with different cultures, and day in and day out, and rub shoulders together. Only then you can appreciate, that is how you see humility, because your way of looking at it is different from mine. We all are under the authority of the scriptures, but our experience is different. So I would say, if I would encourage CGST to have that kind of practicum, that would be really, really helpful.
Well, I think the Bible uses metaphors, analogies, or parables, and all these stories. And I believe that God allows the space for us to interpret it in different cultures differently. It might be intentional, I believe that, so that we can understand God fully, and we can use different perspectives to really understand the meaning of the metaphors, the parables, the stories. Yes, so this is what I believe. So it is okay for different cultures to interpret the Bible slightly different.
Well, I was just going to follow that on with the Lucan parable of what we often call the prodigal son. And what a terrible village that was, that they would allow a member of their community to go hungry. They were really morally, ethically guilty. So this is a story not of a prodigal son, apparently, but of a negligent community. But equally, somewhere higher up, somebody was clearly negligent because they had failed to make adequate provision for the reality of a likely famine. So there were some officials that really needed taken to task, possibly put before the judge and put in prison for their terrible ethical and moral failure. Or apparently the young man was responsible for his own demise. Now, which is it? Well, actually, the text allows all three possibilities. And of course, what we tend to see with our rather overly individualistic, Western reading of that text, is this young man's problem. He was morally at fault, but other cultural values are at play here, like other cultural interpretations are possible when we come to this particular parable. So I think exactly we need a much wider range of readings of texts like this to understand that this story is operating at several levels, and maybe that's intentional.
Maybe I'll take this question to what Patrick said earlier in his lecture about indigenize and pilgrim. And I think all this will go back to this principle of being ourselves part of our culture, but out of our culture. And I think Miroslav Volf put it in a very lovely way. He said, we need to position our identity in this way, we need to see we need to have one foot in our culture, but the other foot is in God's future. And I think I will come now to the practical interpretation, and this is for your question, how this benefits us practically. It's basically when we do that, we will have space for the other to interact with us. And this is a humility. Because I know I only partly in my culture, and part of me is outside of this culture. And so I can have space with the different, with my neighbor, and at the same time, I can be critical to my culture because I have the other foot in God's future. So everything I interpret, it's in God's lens. It's in the lens of the kingdom. And this way, we can be more aware, but also at the same time, humble to understand the other because we give them space in our identity. Yeah.
You know, when we talk about culture, I hope we're making sure that we're not thinking about internationalism in a sense. Like, you know, cultural difference is not, we're not talking about national states, right? Because even within national states, there's so much diversity. And why are we, because we're talking about humility and selflessness, right? So, okay, culture. Can we talk about gender? Right? Maybe gender ends up becoming more of a difficult issue than nation-state differences. Can we talk about class, right? Maybe within Hong Kong, the class difference ends up being humongous, but you know, churches usually end up having certain kinds of class groups. So you think about that, and you realize, wait a minute, what are we talking about? Why are we talking about Hong Kong as like a uniform culture? You know it's not, right? But we think this way. We kind of, certain things become totally invisible. Gender becomes invisible. I'm a man, right? So I have to remind myself on a regular basis, otherwise I'll never think about it, right? Totally male normative. Like I beat myself up to make sure I remember, right? Or a middle class normative. It's invisible to me. I have to make myself see it. You know, generationally, you realize, wait a minute, these Gen, whatever, what is it now? Gen Beta, I guess what it is? I mean, it's incomprehensible, which I totally appreciate it, right? Because we talk about being reverse mentoring. I need to be mentored because I don't understand. So I'm trying to, you know, do Instagram, and my kids are like, why are you so dense? Like, you don't understand how to do this thing. And I'm like, I don't know how to edit this video. How do you do it on a phone? Like, I need a laptop. You're like, why? But I think these are significant cultures, and I think it's really important for us to make sure that we're not thinking about culture in terms of this very traditional interculturalism, nation-state differences. I think that's antiquated almost, but it still lingers, and that's problematic.
I want to make it more complicated. So what about other religions like Islam, who became Christians? Yeah, Christian from Islam background, and also Messianic Jews, Christian from Jewish culture. And so maybe I will say something that may be surprising, but I want you to know that Christian from Islam background, they couldn't find themselves within the Christian community, the Christian who didn't convert it from Islam. They needed to have their own congregations because they keep some issues from their culture as Islam and bring it to their churches. And also Messianic Jew, they don't celebrate Christmas, they celebrate Jewish holidays. So they kept their culture, their religious culture, the original religious culture, to the Christianity. And so I think it's totally fine, as long as we all glorify Christ and God, the only God, right? And so I think, and it was in your question when you say the core values, and I think the core values, they are God's virtue, God's nature, which is love, just, justice, mercy, all his. So, I mean, these are the main thing, and the other things will be okay. So, the main thing is love your God from your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And this is the main commandment. If you work according to this, all these issues that are related to culture should be submitted to this commandment.
Thank you. I think our discussion is revolving in a really good direction because it turns us into another perspective that people who are not on the mission field also have to being aware about the cultural differences between each other, which is what I keep thinking about what culture is. Culture actually is not only about our difference of nations or ethical difference, but might be also because of generation, gender, classes. And I actually want to share one of our recent experience. I think I probably can represent a younger generation of Hong Kong Christians. And I heard a very famous leader in Hong Kong church landscape saying that when we are becoming a pastor, we have to be a role model for everyone, and we need to become the big brother of everyone. So you have to be really presentable, you have to be dominant, and you have to centralize your power. This is what he said, they said. And for people who are younger in their age and sitting down as audience is really weird. And at that moment, I felt like, that we have a cultural difference. Although we are both Hong Kong people and growing up in Hong Kong church context, but still, we got a really different gap on how a leader should look like. I can sense that Dr. Fung do not agree with what someone said. But I guess it is very interesting. Yeah, because you're the advisor of the YL Gen Love Song movement. Coming back. I guess, yes, this is really interesting because what you mentioned in the lecture is not only about people who are going onto mission field, but now, at this moment, everywhere, when you're interacting with each other, we should have that kind of sensitivity. Thank you so much. I guess we have another guest want to ask a question.
As a teacher of seminary, what I concern, what is the culture? Not just the culture outside. Nowadays, many Christians, clever than the captain of Titanic, they won't crash on the iceberg because they already leaned away. They say, we still have many icebergs that we need to go through. That means, according to the statistics of 2010, among 1,300 something churches in Hong Kong, only 0.7% churches say mission is important. So I think another culture is in the world, the culture inside the Christian. If they don't think mission is important, they think it's not my culture, because they already have their own choices. So how can we help the Christian to see the iceberg of mission, not the iceberg of many other ministries?
Can you kindly repeat your question into a shorter version? Thank you.
How can we help the Christian to see that mission is the target? No matter you're a missionary, pastor, or just a layman. It is your choice. It is your order that you need to go through. How can we help them?
I think the question, if I understand Reverend Michael's question, and that is this, that many churches do not have mission as part of their DNA or their culture within the church. They don't see that as important, that we don't own that culture. How do we help that? I'm sure others would have views on this, but I still feel that it is important to begin with biblical teaching. I think the biblical teaching is still crucial, and I think the theological education will be really, really important because you are influencing future leaders of the church. If graduates from seminaries do not have that understanding, it is very hard for them to influence the church. So I think it starts with the seminaries. How can they have that culture in terms of the biblical teaching on mission as well? That will be my kind of oversimplified answer. Yeah.
I think your answer also related to one of our questions online, who asked, how can seminaries in Hong Kong assist students in navigating a future where the city's culture is increasingly perceived as unified rather than multicultural? Yeah.
I talk about this all the time, but I don't think missions will be considered important, or even evangelism, for people if their gospel isn't very good. If it's just a burden, right? So that's my point, right? I have to love God, but I don't really enjoy God. I don't really even like being a Christian that much, but you should be a Christian too. That's a terrible idea. I tell pastors, don't ever say, oh, God's calling me and I hate this thing, but I gotta do it. I was like, don't ever say that. You have a terrible God, right? I don't even want your God, right? So if that's the worst evangelism, that's the worst witness for God. I mean, ministry is hard, but if you don't love it, what are you doing? Then you should leave. Because you are not a very good witness of what God is like. Paul's like, this is killing me, but this is the only thing I would choose. There's something so deeply joyous about what I do. So if we screw that up, then I think missions is incomprehensible. Like evangelism is incomprehensible. What, I'm gonna go overseas to tell people how they can be miserable like me? But fundamentally, if you think of it that way, there's no way to explain it, right? Now, I'm talking very bluntly, but because nobody would say stuff like this, right? They think it, but they would never say it. And what I'm saying is, this is really what's happening. People's gospel isn't very good. And I'm saying, I think it's far better than what is good. And nobody will say that their God isn't very good, but that's the God that they really believe in. It's not very good, right? So if we can't figure that out, we're not going to get anywhere.
If you think that Hong Kong is going to have a unified or homogeneous culture, you might be wrong. Because if you really have some encounters with mainland Chinese people, you know that people from the north, people from the south, people from Sichuan, people from Shanghai, people from Beijing, they are all different. So we don't want to have an oversimplification understanding of so-called Chinese culture. Yeah, so Hong Kong will continue to be multicultural. So this is why we still need to have this multicultural perspective and engage in intercultural mission.
If the question is how to be unified in one cause, I think that's possible. So I'm not an expert in Singapore or in Hong Kong, but I was amazed to see that in Singapore, a lot of different ways, if it's laws, if it's practices in schools, changing the law to force people to unify, to respect one another, to not focus on differences, focus on similarities. different issues like that. I hope I understand things right, but I think there are different ways how to be unified in the same cause, which is whatever you name it. And there are different ways in different levels. But it depends what we want to unify on and how we can do it from the younger generation and start working into that. So it could be on schools, churches, media, civil society. You can work on different levels, but it will take generations. So it depends, what do we want? But as a church, I think we know what we want, right?
So I think we are near the end of our section tonight. As the previous section, I hope I can have the privilege to wrap up the session with another object. I'm very inspired by Dr. Feng's your lecture, because you makes me really aware of that we must have that kind of sensitivity toward others' culture. Especially in our Hong Kong seminary, we actually is doing the opposite always, because we are generating some kind of style for different seminaries in Hong Kong. And we have a very strong unifying element actually inside the seminary as modeling leaders. But after listening to Dr. Patrick Feng's lecture, I'm wondering whether it is a right way to do so, or how can we allowing space for our students to be their own style of leader, especially for future leader. So I would like to use a rubber band to wrap up our section. You know, rubber band. So it's not about that band, but the real rubber band. 橡筋, the 橡筋, the rubber band. So it scratches, and it can be quite uncomfortable if it is on your body, or if there is a very huge rubber band that wrap up all of us, 6 of us, it can be quite uncomfortable. However, it is a kind of sensitivity or limitation that every leader needs to have in order to cooperate with each other. And that rubber band, probably, according to Dr. Fu, would be the kingdom value, our Jesus model. And he is actually imposing some limitation on us for us to interact better to each other and cooperate better to each other. So this concludes our second session. Please join me in expressing our gratitude to both Dr. Fung and Reverend Lam for today's session. And also, thank you so much for our other esteemed guests for such a stimulating discussion. Our sections will continue tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. We look forward to see all of you again very soon. Good night.